For General Motors, it all began to go wrong along a stretch of highway in Georgia on March the 10th, 2010. At the wheel of her Chevrolet Cobalt was Brooke Melton, a pediatric nurse outside Atlanta. It was her 29th birthday, and she was driving down this two-lane highway to meet her boyfriend for dinner. When suddenly her car veered across the center line, and an SUV traveling in the opposite direction smashed into the Cobalt, demolishing it. Later that night, Brooke's mother and father, Beth and Ken, were contacted by the local hospital.
And the surgeon got on the phone with me and told me how bad Brooke's accident was and that she would not be able to recover. She had a broken neck, and there was nothing that she could do for her.
The police said her death was a tragic accident caused by a driving error on wet pavement. But Brooke's dad just couldn't bring himself to accept the official story.
Brooke was so conscientious in her driving. I know that's easy to say for a parent about their child, but she was. She was very conscientious and very careful. That's why I knew it had to be something else. I knew it had to be a mechanical failure somewhere.
The Meltons were also convinced that Exhibit A was the twisted hulk of Brooke's car, her 2005 Chevy Cobalt. But they needed someone to unlock the mysteries it held, an automotive detective to discover what really killed their daughter. It was a circuitous path that brought them to this unlikely place, the little town of Marigold, Mississippi, population 439. There's only one garage in Marigold. Mechanic Charlie Miller started it 30 years ago. He's since earned a reputation as the go-to expert witness in hundreds of American automobile lawsuits.
They wanted to know the truth. No matter what the truth was, they needed to know why their daughter died.
And immediately he knew something was very wrong when he unloaded the data from the Chevy Cobalt's computer.
The engine went from around 2,000 RPM to 0 in 1 second. As a mechanic, you know that's impossible.
What's more, Charlie Miller learned Brooke Melton's ignition switch had somehow moved from on to the accessory position, apparently with disastrous consequences.
And what that told me as a mechanic, that if this switch moved from on to accessory, she had no anti-lock brakes. She had no electronic power steering, and she had no engine control at all.
Miller also noticed how easily the Chevrolet Cobalt's key could be moved from the on position to accessory, with just the slightest jostle, without even knowing it.
It seemed too easy to me. It seemed very easy to move.
Enter Mark Hood, an engineer from Pensacola, Florida. Hood's specialty is failure analysis, investigating events like bridge collapses and plane crashes. Now his assignment was to explain the mysterious loss of power in the Chevy Cobalt in which Brooke Melton died.
This is an actual ignition switch assembly.
This is how a Cobalt ignition switch works.
Clutch in.
When you insert the key, it turns what's called the ignition columns. At the far end is a part called the detent plunger, which goes up and down like the top of a ballpoint pen. As it does, it rotates the cylinder that moves the ignition from on to accessory. It's that tiny spring-loaded plunger, a 57-cent piece, that determines how easily the key will move. So what was going on inside the Cobalt's ignition switch, causing the older ignitions to let the key slip into the accessory position with such tragic consequences? Atlanta attorney Lance Cooper set out to piece together that puzzle for the Meltons. He says he'll never forget the phone call he got from engineer Mark Hood.
He says, "Lance, you're not going to believe what I just found." And I said, "What?" And he said, "They changed the switch." I said, "What do you mean they changed the switch?" And he said, They changed the newer switch to make it harder to turn the key from run to accessory or off.
Hood had made a crucial discovery. The plunger from Brooke Melton's ignition, the one that malfunctioned, was infinitesimally shorter than the new part that worked just fine.
And on this card, I've taped down a 2005 detent plunger and a new replacement detent plunger, and you can see the difference in length between the two detent plungers.
That disparity is a mere 1.6 millimeters, just the thickness of a quarter, but it literally would be the difference between life and death for Brooke Melton.